This podcast explores real-life experiences and events. This is Stranger Than Fiction with Daniel Caine. With all the controversy over the nature of consciousness, is it time for a new paradigm? When it comes to life, death, and consciousness, there exists so many paradigms that are all ultimately trying to describe the same thing. It's as if each of us are looking at a different facet of an intricately cut diamond from our own limited point of view, without being able to step back and see the whole stone, and without realizing that the visible facets presenting are not what the diamond actually is. But even if we accept our countless paradigms as a collective map of the facets describing the diamond's surface, then the edges of each paradigm, if correct, should fit perfectly together like the pieces of a jigsaw puzzle to build an accurate picture of consciousness. Too often, though, the pieces don't seem to fit together at all. And that's because the edges of the pieces are ragged with the describer's own confirmation bias, fueled by rationalization, justification, minimization, rejection, and denial of any other point of view. In this episode, over 2 parts, we will explore how the paradigms of science and the paradigms of faith can match perfectly, if only the confirmation bias is not allowed to limit the view of what we are all experiencing through consciousness. A 20-minute wait for a bus. A 1-hour journey to the coach terminal. A 30-minute wait for the airport shuttle. A bone-jarring 1.5-hour trip to Melbourne Airport on an aging minibus. A 3-hour wait in the airport lounge after checking in. A 25-hour flight to London. 1 hour to clear customs, immigration, and baggage control. A 15-minute wait for the Heathrow Express to Paddington Station. A further 1-hour wait for the Bristol Temple Mead service. A 1.5-hour rail journey. And finally, a 15-minute walk to my accommodation. I fell forward, spread-eagled onto the bed. From closing my front door in Australia to manhandling my heavy suitcase through the service department door in the city of Bath had taken over 35 hours of non-stop travel, mostly endured without sleep. But as inviting as the freshly laundered linen against my face was, I knew how dangerous it would be to succumb and stay there for even a second longer. I didn't even know why I was in this town. The planned travel itinerary for my trip to London that I'd booked had been suddenly changed when a few weeks before my departure, one of those visual flashes of imagery usurping my visual cortex left me staring at a map of southern England superimposed over the scene of domesticity in my apartment. Curiously, the background of the map appeared entirely black, with the coastline marked in a very faint white line, but a thicker gold line that appeared to almost glow clearly linked London in the east of the country to the city of Bath over in the west. And since it didn't matter where I got over the worst of the jet lag in the first couple of days, that odd fleeting vision of the map had seemed significant enough for me to adjust my itinerary and immediately head for the town on arrival. In any case, I'd never visited the place before, so it was a good opportunity to see why people spoke so highly of it. I pulled myself from the bed and took a desperately needed shower and headed out to the supermarket to buy a cheap mobile phone, milk, coffee, and some lunch before I would undoubtedly crash for the next 12 hours. The staff at reception had told me of a shortcut that avoided the traffic and busy pedestrian walkways, So I cut through under the archway into the deserted narrow cobbled street as directed, soaking in the preserved old-world Georgian atmosphere with each of my steps. Halfway along that stretch of sandy-coloured three-storied terrace of Bathstone buildings, though, my attention was caught by an open double doorway, flush with the building's frontage, and I couldn't help but glance in from the street. Over in the left-hand corner of the small, dimly lit entrance area was a lady sitting at a table, and she smiled at me before asking if I was there for the demonstration. Questioningly, I stepped back and looked up to see a large sign that read Spiritualist Church. But before I could reply no and offer my apologies and continue on to the supermarket, the lady engaged me further with a few pleasantries, and on noticing my accent, asked me what my name was, venturing that I was not from around those parts. Daniel, I replied, adding that I was visiting from Australia. Ah, Daniel, came a voice in a strong Scottish accent, and from behind the open right-hand double door, out stepped an elderly man. I was told to wait here for you, Daniel, he continued. The medium's car has just broken down, and she can't make it. We're running about 10 minutes late. Please. And the man simply motioned me in. Maybe it had something to do with the fatigue and jet lag, but without the slightest hesitation, I silently stepped inside and followed the man across the reception area and through the facing doors that led into the interior of the small, intimate church. We continued on along the central aisle, past the waiting congregation, and a hush descended on us reaching the two high-backed wooden chairs and lectern on the platform area at the front. My name is Alan, by the way, the man whispered with a kind smile as he invited me with a motion of his hand to take a seat facing the congregation. I mindlessly poured myself a glass of water from the jug on a table next to me and sipped at it as I eyed the faces looking back at me. Alan was by now addressing the congregation, and I recall nothing of what he was saying until I heard the words, "And so Daniel, a medium from Australia, has kindly stepped in to give the demonstration." And before I could mentally process the word medium, he turned to me with another of his kind smiles and said, "Daniel, could I ask you to open the service in prayer?" In some reasoning, cognizant part of my brain, there was a distant sense of background panic at the request, and I could clearly hear my own internal dialogue. What am I doing sitting on the platform of a church, let alone a spiritualist church? Apparently, I stood. I'm supposed to be on the way to the supermarket. Apparently, I began to utter the words of a prayer. I just need to get some sleep. Apparently, I then took my seat in the high-backed chair again and waited while Alan addressed the congregation for a few more minutes. I had not set foot in any church for over 40 years, not since I was 9 years old when my father finally relented in his demands that I attend the local church Sunday school, a weekly visit that only served to spoil my weekends. So my internal dialogue became silenced with paralysis as it short-circuited itself in pondering what prayer I could have possibly just uttered to that congregation. The proceedings may then have involved some hymn singing. That I cannot attest to, but having finished his announcements, Alan simply turned to me and asked me if I would take the platform to deliver a 1-hour public demonstration of mediumship. Not only had I never given such a demonstration, I was totally unconvinced as to the existence of a spirit, or an afterlife, or even a God. And that only makes my opening statement on standing all the more fascinating. Ladies and gentlemen, please forgive me. Having just landed from a long-haul flight, I've had almost no sleep in the last 36 hours. I'm tired, I'm hungry, and I'm desperately in need of a coffee. So, it would be very tempting to open by saying that I have someone's grandmother with me who sadly passed from a heart attack, in the sure knowledge that I would elicit a good show of hands. However, if I was to say that with me is in fact a friend of someone here who used to be a naval intelligence officer from Birkenhead before his passing, I am quite sure there would be fewer takers. A single hand of confirmation was raised from amongst those gathered there, and so began my first ever public demonstration of the very thing I did not believe in. I found it difficult to come to terms with what had happened. I'd been taken over by another automaton state, in the same way as when I'd been guided to the location of the murder victim's body. But this time, dozens of people were watching me. This all did not sit well with me. I most definitely did not, and still do not, espouse the beliefs of the spiritualist movement. Yet how could I square this with the experience I'd had in that spiritualist church? And to explain that dilemma of apparent contradiction, I must first explain why I had booked that trip to London in the first place.